I'm not just a random office worker. I'm an FBI agent, and you've just crossed the line. The words hit Officer John Harris like a freight train, freezing him in place. He stood there in the middle of the street, surrounded by a few bystanders who had watched the entire confrontation unfold. His mind raced, unable to process the gravity of the situation. He had just humiliated a woman who, until moments ago, seemed like any other ordinary person. Maya Williams, a woman in her early 30s, stood in front of him, her posture calm but unwavering. Her dark eyes met his with an unspoken confidence that made Harris's heart race in a way he wasn't used to. He had seen people in her position before, people who were easy to dismiss, easy to overlook. But this time, he had made a grave mistake. As he tried to collect his thoughts, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Maya wasn't just a civilian. She wasn't just some woman walking down the street. She wasn't someone he could push around with his authority. She was FBI, and he had just crossed a line he didn't even know existed. Harris felt the heat rise in his cheeks as he realized how deeply wrong he had been. He had humiliated her, questioned her presence, and treated her as if she didn't belong. Maya, however, didn't show anger. Instead, she stood with an air of quiet authority, as if she knew this moment would come. Her gaze never wavered, and her voice, calm and steady, was like a declaration of power. "You've just made a big mistake," Maya continued, her tone sharp yet measured. "You thought you could belittle me because of my appearance, my job, or my background. But you've underestimated me." Harris wanted to say something, anything, but his mouth went dry. He had been so certain of his own rightness, so sure that his position in life gave him the right to act as he had. He had never expected this quiet, unassuming woman to stand up to him, to reveal her true identity, and to expose the ugly truth of his actions. Maya let the silence hang in the air for a moment, letting the weight of her words sink in. The people around them seemed to hold their breath, unsure of what would happen next. Harris tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He felt small, powerless in a way he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just about the situation at hand. It was about his entire worldview being shattered in an instant. How many times had he used his position to intimidate, to silence people like Maya? How many times had he assumed that his authority would go unquestioned? Now, he had learned the hard way that power could be fleeting, that it wasn't enough to simply hold a badge or wear a uniform. Real power came from respect, from understanding, and from a willingness to see beyond surface-level judgments. Maya took a step forward, her presence commanding but not threatening. She didn't need to raise her voice to make her point. "You don't get to treat people like that," she said softly. "You don't get to decide who deserves respect and who doesn't. I may not have the uniform, but I have the power to make things right." Harris felt a lump form in his throat as the reality of his actions began to hit him. He had treated Maya as less than human, assuming she was nothing more than a mere bystander. He had used his authority to belittle her, not realizing that she was someone who could bring him down with just a few simple words. The shame of it all weighed heavily on him, and for the first time in a long while, he wasn't sure what to do next. "I thought you had more common sense than this," Harris muttered under his breath, still reeling from the shock of the truth Maya had just revealed. He glanced around, the once crowded street now seemingly quieter. People had stopped what they were doing to witness the unfolding drama, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. Maya remained calm, her stance unwavering, though Harris could tell by the way her jaw clenched that this was no ordinary situation. "You should have never treated me like that," Maya said, her voice still steady, but the weight of her words hung in the air, undeniable. "And you should have never assumed that just because I'm dressed a certain way, or I don't have a badge on me, that you could push me around." Harris shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't used to being spoken to like this. He had built a career on commanding, respect through his uniform, his authority. But here, with Maya standing in front of him, it felt like everything he knew about power was being questioned. He swallowed hard, trying to regain some semblance of control. "I didn't know," he said, though it sounded more like an excuse than an apology. "I didn't know who you were. You didn't give me any reason to think you were someone important." Maya shook her head slowly, as if she had already expected him to say something like that. "It's not about importance, John," she said, her use of his first name making him pause. "It's about respect. It's about recognizing that we all deserve the same dignity, no matter who we are or what we do. I could have been anyone, and it still wouldn't have been okay to treat me like you did. Harris wanted to protest, to defend himself, but something about Maya's calm, unwavering presence made it impossible for him to continue. He had no defense. He had crossed a line, and he knew it. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice quieter than before. Maya didn't seem satisfied with just an apology. She had heard plenty of those in her career, but they didn't change anything. They didn't fix what had already been broken. "Sorry isn't enough," she said, her tone sharp now. "You have to understand why this is wrong. You have to see that your actions have consequences, not just for you, but for everyone you come into contact with. People like you, who think they can do whatever they want, need to be held accountable." Harris opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He realized she was right. He had been wrong, and it wasn't just about this one moment. It was about the way he had been operating for years, assuming his badge made him untouchable, assuming his position gave him the right to belittle and intimidate people. But now, standing in front of him was someone who had seen through that facade, who had shown him how easily power could be overturned, how quickly a single person could shift the balance. Maya turned to walk away, but before she could take a step, Harris called after her. "Wait," he said, his voice hesitant. She stopped but didn't turn around. "What happens now?" Maya didn't look back at him as she replied, her words firm but not unkind. "What happens now is up to you. You can either learn from this, or you can keep making the same mistakes. It's your choice." Harris stood there, frozen in place, watching her walk away. He wanted to say something else, but he knew he couldn't. The damage had been done, and now, the only thing left to do was reflect on the lesson he had just been taught. It was a lesson about power, respect, and the understanding that no one, no matter their position, was above another. And as Maya disappeared into the distance, Harris couldn't help but feel like something inside him had shifted. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was in control. He didn't feel like the one calling the shots. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what he needed. "I'm not used to this," Harris thought, sitting in his patrol car, the engine running but his mind miles away. It had been hours since his encounter with Maya Williams, and he couldn't shake the feeling that everything he thought he knew about his job, about his role in the world, had been turned upside down. The streets outside were busy, cars honking, people moving about their daily routines, but for Harris, everything felt quieter. The sounds, the chatter, the buzz of the world around him seemed distant. He couldn't stop thinking about Maya. She had said things he had never heard before, things that made him question himself, his actions, his career. He had always thought he knew how to handle situations, how to keep control, how to assert his authority. But Maya had broken through that armor with a few simple words, and he couldn't ignore it. He hadn't felt so uncertain in years. The radio crackled to life, pulling Harris from his thoughts. "Unit 32, we need you at the west side for a routine check," the dispatcher's voice called through the static. Harris sighed and turned off the engine, taking a moment to steady himself before he responded. "Copy that. On my way." He didn't feel like doing his usual rounds. He didn't feel like pretending anymore, pretending that everything was fine when, in reality, something inside him had shifted. As he drove, Harris couldn't help but replay the moment over and over in his head. He saw Maya's face again, calm, collected, unwavering. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't intimidated by him. She didn't back down. And now, more than ever, he realized that he didn't have all the answers. For the first time in his life, he felt like he had a lot to learn. As he arrived at the west side, Harris saw a group of officers already gathered around, talking to a man who was standing by his car. It was just another routine stop, another interaction that seemed mundane. But to Harris, it didn't feel the same. He stepped out of the car, forcing himself to focus on the task at hand, trying to block out the nagging thoughts in the back of his mind. "Hey, Harris," one of the officers called to him, waving as he approached. "You good, man? You seem out of it today." Harris forced a smile, nodding. "Yeah, just thinking." The officer raised an eyebrow, but didn't press further. They had work to do. "Well, we've got a situation here," the officer said. "A guy's claiming he didn't do anything wrong, but we need to check him out." Harris nodded, falling into his familiar routine. But this time, it felt different. He wasn't just going through the motions. He wasn't just looking for reasons to assert control. He was actually listening, paying attention. The man in front of them seemed nervous, glancing around, his hands shaking slightly as he spoke. Harris could tell he was hiding something, but instead of jumping to conclusions, he took a step back and let the conversation unfold naturally. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush to make judgments. For the first time in a long while, he was focused on understanding, not commanding. As the conversation continued, Harris found himself making a mental note to reassess how he handled things. He couldn't go back to the way he was before. He couldn't just use his authority to silence others. He needed to be better. He needed to find a way to balance his job with the respect that Maya had shown him, a respect he had never truly extended to others. When the situation was over, Harris got back in his car, feeling a small sense of satisfaction. He hadn't solved all his problems. He hadn't fixed everything about himself. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. Maybe Maya had been right all along. Maybe it wasn't just about wearing a badge. Maybe it was about understanding the power of listening, of seeing others as equals, not as people to be controlled. Harris couldn't help but think about Maya as he drove home that night. She had given him a gift, something he never expected. And now, he had to decide what to do with it. I had always believed in the rules. The rules kept everything in order. They kept me in control, and that was the way it was supposed to be. But after the encounter with Maya, I found myself questioning everything I had ever stood for. I had always thought that as long as I wore the badge, as long as I was a police officer, I was untouchable. My position gave me power, and that power gave me the right to make decisions, to control situations. But Maya had shown me how easily that power could be overturned, how fragile my authority really was. The silence in my apartment that night was suffocating. It was as if everything I had ever known was unraveling before my eyes. The walls felt like they were closing in, the weight of my thoughts pressing on me. I stared at the ceiling, replaying Maya's words over and over in my mind. You don't get to decide who deserves respect and who doesn't. Her voice echoed in my head. I had always believed I was doing the right thing, following orders, upholding the law. But now I wasn't so sure. Had I really been upholding justice? Or had I been enforcing my own sense of superiority? I could still feel the sting of her words. Sorry isn't enough, she had said. I couldn't just apologize and expect things to be okay. I couldn't just move on as if nothing had happened. I had to do better. I had to be better. But how? I didn't know where to start. The next morning, I woke up early, my mind still clouded with doubt. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt so lost, so unsure of myself. The world outside seemed unchanged, as if it was moving forward without me. But I wasn't moving with it. I wasn't sure if I ever would again. As I got ready for work, I glanced at my uniform in the mirror. The same uniform I had worn every day for years. The same badge that had once made me feel invincible. Now, it felt like a heavy weight. I didn't want to put it on. I didn't want to go back to work. But I knew I had to. I had to face the consequences of my actions. I had to do what Maya had told me to do. Understand why I was wrong, and learn from it. I got in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, as if it was the only thing keeping me grounded. The drive to the station felt different today. Every turn, every stoplight, every pedestrian crossing the street seemed like a reminder of everything I had taken for granted. The moment I stepped into the station, the familiar hum of activity felt distant. My colleagues were going about their usual routines, talking, laughing, doing their jobs. But I couldn't focus on them. My mind was elsewhere, thinking about Maya, thinking about what she had said, thinking about how I had treated her. I tried to push the thoughts aside as I walked through the halls, but they kept coming back. I couldn't escape them. I found myself at my desk, staring at the pile of paperwork in front of me, unable to concentrate. My mind was racing, my thoughts jumbled. It was then that my partner, Detective Laura Williams, approached me. "Hey, you good?" she asked, noticing the look on my face. "You've been off all day." I looked up at her, struggling to find the words. How could I explain what had happened? How could I explain how everything had changed in just one moment? How could I explain how someone I had never even met had made me question everything? "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." Laura raised an eyebrow but didn't press the issue. "All right. Well, if you need to talk, I'm here," she said before walking away. I watched her go, feeling the weight of her words. She wasn't the one who needed to talk. I was. But I didn't know how to start. I didn't know how to explain to anyone, let alone myself, what had happened. How do you admit that you've been wrong your whole life? How do you admit that you've been blind to the reality around you? How do you face the truth when the truth is something you've been avoiding for so long? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing. I couldn't keep going like this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I had to change. And maybe, just maybe, this was the first step. I walked into the station the next morning with a purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. The familiar hum of voices, the clinking of coffee mugs, the low chatter of my colleagues. It was all the same, but to me, it felt different. I felt different. There was a weight in the air, something unspoken, and for the first time in months, I was actually aware of it. Maya's words echoed in my mind as I made my way to my desk. "You need to understand why you were wrong," she had said. I had spent hours trying to piece together everything that had happened, trying to make sense of it, but nothing made sense. How could I, a law enforcement officer, someone sworn to uphold justice, have been the one to wrong someone? I had always prided myself on doing the right thing, on being the authority, but now I was questioning everything. My desk was still cluttered with paperwork from yesterday, the usual mountain of reports and files that I had learned to push through, day after day. But today, I couldn't focus. Every word on the page seemed to blur together. I couldn't concentrate on anything. My partner, Detective Laura Williams, walked by, pausing when she saw the look on my face. "You still look like you're carrying the weight of the world, Harris," she said, concern in her voice. I didn't know how to explain. How could I tell her that something inside me had shifted, that I was no longer the person I had been just a few days ago? "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired. Long night." She didn't buy it, but she didn't press. "All right. Well, let me know if you need to talk," she said, before walking away. I appreciated her offer, but I wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. I didn't even know where to start. The day passed slowly, and I found myself drifting in and out of thoughts. Every encounter, every situation, felt different. I wasn't looking for answers anymore. I was looking for understanding. I knew what I needed to do, but I wasn't sure if I had the courage to do it. That night, I found myself standing in front of my mirror again, looking at the man who had spent so many years wearing the badge. The man who had believed he knew everything there was to know about power and control. The man who had thought he understood justice. But now, he felt like a stranger. I looked at the uniform, still hanging neatly in the closet. It was just a uniform, but today, it felt like a symbol of everything I had misunderstood. I could feel the weight of Maya's words pressing down on me. She had shown me that power wasn't just about what you wore, it was about how you treated people, how you saw them, how you listened. I knew that now. I had been blind to it before, but Maya had opened my eyes. It was time to change. The next morning, I showed up early. I hadn't told anyone what I was about to do, but I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The station was quiet when I walked in. The usual bustle hadn't started yet, and I appreciated the stillness. I didn't want to be surrounded by noise, by distractions. I wanted clarity. I headed straight for the office of Captain Stevens. He had been a mentor to me in the past, someone I had looked up to. But now, I wasn't sure if I still saw him the same way. "Harris, what's up?" he asked, looking up from his desk as I knocked on the door. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "I need to talk to you about something," I said. Captain Stevens studied me for a moment, sensing the seriousness in my tone. "Go ahead," he said, gesturing for me to sit. I sat down across from him, feeling a weight in my chest. I had never been one to shy away from difficult conversations, but this felt different. "I messed up," I said, the words coming out almost too easily. "I treated someone wrong, and I can't just walk away from it like it was nothing." Stevens didn't interrupt. He just waited, his gaze steady. "I've been doing some thinking, and I realized that I've been blinded by my position, by my authority. I've treated people like they were beneath me, and I've used my badge to intimidate them." The words felt strange coming out of my mouth, but they were true. And I don't want to be that person anymore. There was a long silence, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if Stevens was going to respond. Finally, he spoke. "Harris, I'm proud of you for admitting that. It takes a lot of guts to admit when you've been wrong. But that's the first step." I nodded, feeling a small sense of relief. "I want to do better," I said quietly. "I want to make things right." Stevens leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped in front of him. "Then you're already on the right path." I didn't know where this journey would take me, but I knew that for the first time in a long time, I was ready to take it. I wasn't going to be the same person I was yesterday. I was going to listen. I was going to learn. And, hopefully, I was going to make a difference. I had no idea what to expect when I walked into the community center that afternoon. The day had been long, my mind still processing everything that had happened over the past few days. I had come to realize that my job wasn't just about enforcing laws. It was about people. It was about understanding them, about listening to their stories, and, most importantly, about respecting them. I had made mistakes. Big ones. But now, I was ready to take the first step toward making things right. I didn't know where to start, but this felt like the right place. The community center was busy, full of families and individuals coming together, talking, laughing, and going about their daily lives. It was a stark contrast to the weight I had been carrying around. I walked in, my shoes clicking softly on the floor as I took in the scene. A few kids ran past me, laughing, chasing each other with carefree energy. It reminded me of the joy that seemed so distant from my world lately. I approached the front desk, where a woman in her early 40s looked up from her paperwork and smiled warmly. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice friendly but professional. I took a deep breath. "I'm Officer Harris," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was hoping to speak with someone about getting involved in the community. I've made some mistakes, and I want to do better. I want to help. Her smile softened, and she nodded. "We always welcome people who want to make a difference. Let me get someone to talk to you." She stood and walked to the back of the room, returning a few moments later with a man in his 50s, his face lined with age but his posture confident. He had the kind of presence that made you want to listen. "You're Officer Harris, right?" he asked, extending his hand. I shook it, feeling the strength in his grip. "I'm Greg Daniels. I run the community outreach programs here. I understand you want to get involved." I nodded, my heart beating a little faster. I've been thinking a lot about how I've been doing my job, and I want to make things right. I've treated people wrong, and I know that. But I want to change. I want to be part of something that makes a difference. Greg studied me for a moment, his eyes searching my face as if trying to gauge my sincerity. After a long pause, he nodded. "All right, Harris. I can see you're serious. Let's talk." We sat down at one of the tables, and Greg began explaining the various programs the community center offered. They weren't just about helping people. They were about building relationships, fostering trust, and creating opportunities for growth. The more he spoke, the more I realized that this wasn't just about me making up for my mistakes. This was about truly understanding the people I had been overlooking, about seeing them as human beings with their own struggles, hopes, and dreams. Greg made it clear that the work was difficult, but it was also rewarding. "It's not enough to just show up, Harris," he said, his tone serious. "You have to put in the time, earn their trust, and be consistent. They need to see that you care, that you're here for them. It's a long road, but it's worth it." I nodded, knowing that this was exactly what I needed to hear. I wasn't going to fix everything overnight, but I was ready to take that first step. "I'm ready," I said, my voice firm. "I'll do whatever it takes." Greg smiled. "Good. We'll start small. Get involved in the youth mentorship program. Work with the kids. Show them that you're someone they can rely on. If you're willing to commit, we'll give you the support you need." I agreed, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. This was it, the beginning of a new chapter. It wasn't going to be easy, but I wasn't afraid of hard work. I had a lot to make up for, and this was the first real opportunity one had to make a difference. Over the next few weeks, I spent my days at the community center, interacting with the kids, learning about their lives, and trying my best to show them that I cared. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when I felt like I wasn't making any progress, like I was still stuck in the same place. But little by little, I began to see change, not just in them, but in myself. I wasn't perfect, and I knew that. But I was trying, and that was all that mattered. One afternoon, as I was helping a group of kids with their homework, one of them looked up at me and smiled. "You're different from the other officers," he said, his voice quiet but full of sincerity. "You actually listen to us." I smiled back, my heart swelling with something I hadn't felt in a long time, pride. I wasn't just wearing a badge anymore. I was actually making a difference. I had been at the community center for a few weeks now, and something was slowly beginning to shift inside me. The work wasn't easy, but it felt important. The more time I spent with the kids, the more I realized how much I had taken for granted in my own life. I had been so focused on power and control, thinking that wearing a uniform gave me the right to make decisions for others. But now, I was learning that real power wasn't about enforcing laws. It was about making a connection, understanding people, and showing them that you cared. The kids were slowly starting to trust me. They were opening up, telling me their stories, and I was listening. It wasn't always easy, especially when they talked about their struggles at home, at school, or in their neighborhoods. But I listened, and I tried to be there for them. I spent time with them, not as an officer, but as a person. I showed them that I wasn't just another authority figure who would judge them, but someone who wanted to help them succeed. One afternoon, after a long day of working with the kids, I found myself sitting in the community center's break room, staring at my coffee. My shift was over, and I was tired, but it was a different kind of tired. I wasn't worn out from fighting or chasing criminals. I was tired from giving my time, my attention, and my heart. It was a good kind of tired. But even in the midst of all the progress, there were moments of doubt. There were days when I wondered if I was really making a difference, if I was truly helping. It wasn't always easy to see the change, especially when it felt like I was just one person trying to change an entire system. But those small moments, the smiles, the gratitude, the little breakthroughs, I held on to those. They kept me going. One day, I was sitting with a group of kids in the center's after-school program, helping them with their homework. A young boy named Marcus was struggling with a math problem. He was frustrated, his face scrunched up in concentration, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get it right. I watched him for a moment, and then I walked over. "Need a hand?" I asked, crouching down next to him. He looked up, a little embarrassed. "I just don't get it," he muttered, pushing the paper away. I smiled, picking up the paper and pointing to the problem. "All right, let's break it down together. What do you know so far?" We worked through the problem step by step. It took a while, but eventually, Marcus understood. His face lit up when he finally solved it. "I did it," he exclaimed, a grin spreading across his face. "You did," I said, giving him a high five. "Good job, Marcus. Keep it up." It was a small victory, but to me, it felt huge. It wasn't about the math problem. It was about him realizing that he could do it, that he wasn't as stuck as he thought he was. Over the next few weeks, I continued to work with the kids, helping them with homework, talking to them about their lives, and just being there when they needed someone to listen. And slowly, I began to see change. Not just in them, but in myself. I was learning to listen, to show empathy, to put my own judgments aside. I was starting to understand that my job wasn't just about enforcing the law. It was about making connections, building trust, and doing what I could to help people. I wasn't perfect, and I knew I still had a lot of work to do. But every day, I was taking a step forward. And that was enough for now. It had been 2 months since I first stepped into the community center, and something had changed within me. It wasn't just the work I was doing with the kids or the programs I was helping run. It was the way I saw the world, the way I saw people. Every day, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't had before. I wasn't just going through the motions anymore. I wasn't just a cop. I was someone who had to do right by people, someone who had to make a real impact. The kids had started to open up more. Marcus, the young boy I'd helped with his math problem, had come to me after class one day, holding a paper in his hands. "I got an A on the test, Mr. Harris," he said, his face glowing with pride. I smiled, feeling a sense of pride for him too. "That's great, Marcus. I'm proud of you." He grinned. "I couldn't have done it without you." His words hit me harder than I expected. I had helped him with one test, but it was more than just the test. It was the belief that he could do it. It was seeing someone like him, someone who had so much potential but had been written off by so many, succeed. It wasn't just a win for him. It was a win for me too. Over time, I started noticing a change in my colleagues. Detective Laura Williams, who had always been more of a traditional law and order type, began to ask me about the work I was doing with the kids. She asked how she could help, what programs she could get involved in. It wasn't a drastic shift, but it was enough to make me see that maybe this wasn't just about me. Maybe the way I was thinking, the way I was working, could inspire others too. One evening, after a long day at the center, I found myself walking back to my car when I saw Laura standing outside, waiting for me. "Hey, Harris, got a minute?" she called out. "Sure," I said, walking over. "What's up?" She seemed a little hesitant, but then she spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said," she said, looking at me seriously. "About how you've been doing things differently. I'm starting to see it. The kids trust you. They look up to you. And I think I want to try that. To listen more, to give people the benefit of the doubt. I was surprised by her words, but also touched. You're already doing it, I said. Just by being willing to listen. That's what it takes. She nodded. Yeah, but I need to do more. I need to step outside of my own way of thinking. I've always been about results, about getting things done fast, but maybe it's time I start focusing on the people behind those results. The conversation was brief, but it stuck with me. I hadn't expected anyone else to notice the change in me, but hearing Laura say it made me realize that it wasn't just my actions that were changing. It was the way others were seeing things too. The next few weeks passed by quickly, but I kept noticing these small changes, how I interacted with people, how they responded to me, how I responded to them. I felt like I was becoming more in tune with the world around me. One afternoon, I walked into the community center and was met with a surprise. The kids had put together a small event, a thank you ceremony, to show their appreciation for all the work I had been doing with them. They had made posters, written letters, and even put together a short skit. It wasn't much, but it meant everything to me. As I stood there, surrounded by the kids who had become a part of my life, I realized something. This was what I had been missing. I had spent so many years in a job that had been about authority, about power, about keeping control. But now, I realized that real power wasn't about control, it was about connection. It was about building relationships, lifting people up, and being there for them when they needed it the most. That day, as the kids presented me with their handmade thank you card, I realized that I was no longer just a cop. I was part of a community, and that was worth more than any badge or title I could ever wear. I had been working at the community center for almost 4 months now, and in that time, I had seen a transformation in myself that I hadn't expected. The work had its challenges, and there were moments when I doubted whether I was truly making a difference. But there were also moments of clarity, when I saw a kid's face light up with pride after achieving something they thought they couldn't do, or when a parent thanked me for taking the time to listen, really listen. Those moments kept me going. I had learned to be patient, to listen before reacting, and to understand that change didn't happen overnight. It took time, it took effort, and sometimes, it took a lot of humility. The last few weeks had been a blur of activity, meeting with parents, running workshops, and continuing my work with the kids. It wasn't easy, but it was meaningful. One Friday afternoon, as I was wrapping up a meeting with a local school principal about a new after-school program, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Laura. Harris, I need to talk to you. It's important. My heart skipped a beat. Laura and I had been working together more closely recently, and I had come to appreciate her perspective, but I could tell by the tone of her message that something was off. I texted back quickly. What's going on? I'll explain when you get here, she replied. The urgency in her message set my nerves on edge. I drove to the station, my mind racing with possibilities, unsure of what I was walking into. When I arrived, I found Laura in the break room, looking more serious than I had ever seen her. Hey, what's going on? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She motioned for me to sit down. We've got a situation, she said quietly. It's about the community center. My heart sank. What happened? I asked, bracing myself. There's been a complaint, she said, her eyes meeting mine. From someone in the department. They don't like the fact that you've been spending so much time there. They don't think it's appropriate. I was taken aback. What do you mean? I've been doing my job. I'm making a difference. Laura nodded. I know. I've seen it. But there are others who don't see it that way. They think you've been stepping outside of your role, trying to be something you're not. I felt a surge of frustration. I'm not trying to be anything I'm not. I'm trying to help. I know, Laura said softly. But this is bigger than just you. You've got people questioning your commitment to the job. The room felt like it was closing in on me. All the progress I had made, all the work I had done, was it going to be undone by people who didn't understand? So what now? I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Laura hesitated. We need to be careful. We can't let this get out of hand. But you need to decide what you want. Do you want to keep pushing forward with this community work, or do you want to focus back on your career as a cop? I stared at her, the weight of her question hitting me like a punch to the gut. I had always been a cop. It had been my identity for so long, but now, I didn't know. I didn't know if I could go back to just being that person. The one who wore the badge without understanding what it really meant. The one who never listened, never saw the people in front of him. I had learned so much over the last few months, and I wasn't sure I could go back to the way things were. I don't know what I want anymore. I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But I know I can't stop doing what I've been doing. I can't walk away from it. Not now. Laura gave me a small smile, one that was filled with understanding. I get it, she said. You've changed, Harris. And it's not a bad thing. But you've got to be prepared for the challenges that are coming. I nodded slowly, feeling a sense of resolve settle in my chest. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I couldn't turn my back on what I had started. The road ahead was uncertain, and I knew there